6 stupendously shocking, scary stories. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified. A demonic old man threatens my husband. In the city where I live, there's a small drive-through smoothie shack. It's located next to a large body of water, and there are picnic tables for people to sit around the back of the shack if they want to drink their smoothie and take in the view. About 3 years ago, my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and I decided to go get smoothies as a treat. We pulled into the parking lot and around the back of the shack to get in line. If I remember correctly, there were 1 or 2 cars in front of us. We pulled up to the menu board and my boyfriend rolled down the window to get a better look. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a very old man shuffled up next to the car. He was dressed pretty well in a sweater and dress slacks. I could tell he was really old due to the hunched way he walked and his white hair. He caught both my husband and I by surprise since we hadn't seen anyone sitting at the picnic tables. The old man rested his hand on the rolled down window and stooped over towards my husband. "You dropped your hat." My husband and I stared at him in confusion. Neither of us wore hats. "It's right there in the street." He pointed behind the car and my husband and I both turned to look. There was no hat. "Don't you see it? It's right there." We turned back to look at him, both totally confused, and suddenly, the man's voice dropped several octaves and he spoke with a guttural growl. "No? Well, why don't I drag you out of this car with my knife?" At this point, we went from confused to scared. The man was gripping the window with both hands and leaning towards my husband in an aggressive manner. Then, just as abruptly as he'd threatened us, his voice turned cheerful again and he spoke in an almost sing-song tone with a smile. "Just kidding, just kidding." I motioned to my husband to pull away. The whole encounter was incredibly unsettling. My husband gently began to move the car forward and the old man was forced to let go. We pulled away without getting our smoothies and back onto the main road. Neither of us looked back. We were both too shaken up. I checked to see if there were any alerts for missing elderly people because it occurred to me that he may have had dementia and wandered off, but I couldn't find anything. It's taken us a while to go back to the smoothie shack after that, but we haven't seen that old man again since. I just had sleep paralysis, and I know it was real, and I'm in need of some desperate help. This is the first time I've ever had proper sleep paralysis. I'll try and stay straight to the point because I'm really shaken up right now, but I need answers. So I've been really tired the past few days because of a new job, and recently I've been going through some depression, and I moved back to my dad's and had a small argument, and the depression's kind of starting to creep back in. So today I decided to go to sleep early from all this tiredness at about 8 p.m. I heard my door open and it was my brother, or so I thought. He closes the door behind him and says hey, then steps over me, and I just assume he's gonna borrow my charger or something until I look up and he's standing over me looking down. Then he steps on my hips and I see his feet, which are like really long, and he's only 14. Then he places his palms on my ribs just below my chest and angles his fingers outward, which is kind of weird and reminds me of like a humanoid Spider-Man perching pose. Anyway, I try to shake him off, but he's too strong and I feel pressure all over my body. Then he starts saying what he's done to the rest of my family, like murdering, maiming, my pets, my friends, you name it. As he leans closer, I see blood spats on his face, and he's got a widening grin with this manic gaze. He leans closer and becomes more incoherent, but I can tell he's saying something like what he's going to do to me, but it's just not clear. And I realise it's not my brother, and I frantically begin trying to get him off, but to no avail. He's stronger than me and I can't move, and he comes closer and closer, and I see him slowly morph into something inhuman. He's long and gaunt with prominent cheekbones sucked in, white irises and pin-sized pupils. I get this feeling of pure terror and scream out loud as I can, but nothing comes out. Out of hopelessness, I close my eyes and things go completely black. From this point, there are no words, just an energy exchange. Then I open my eyes, and there's a blanket of shadow to the left of me. It's clear that this thing is getting enjoyment out of my pain and enjoying causing it even more. It's telepathic because it can hear my thoughts and it's showing me its own thoughts. It pounces on me, wrapping itself around me and plunging me into darkness. And when it does this, I can't see anything, and all I can hear is this high-pitched, awful screeching noise, and it feels like I'm drowning. I can't breathe or move, and it begins showing me rapid pictures in a slideshow of awful things like murder and scenes of friends and family having unimaginable things done to them. It lets me go and prowls my room slightly out of my vision, letting me know it's really enjoying my pain, and it's like it's vampirically feeding on it. I can't get over how awful it felt, and nothing I'd done got rid of it. Thinking of Christ, thinking of God, saying it wasn't real, even though I was totally cognition, nothing worked. And it enjoyed it. It pounced back on me, then let me go multiple times. And when I would try to force myself out of it, I would see this white flash and hear a high-pitched pop and be forced deeper into my bed. I truly felt like I was drowning. Eventually, I was able to free my hands and feet while it mocked me, and then I got up and ran to check on the rest of my family. There are some interesting side notes about this experience that I think are worth pointing out. When I looked at my feet, my socks were white, but the socks I was wearing were black. My jeans and body parts that I could see were just a little bit brighter, as if some small amount of light was reflecting off them. I know it's dumb, but I had this strong vision of the band of sacrifice from Berserk on my upper back. And previously in that room, things have felt and moved, but there may be logical reasons to them ones. Anyway, I was sort of dragged back to my feet at one point, and my tailbone was against the wall of my bed as if a gust of wind had carried me there. I'm on a pretty heavy adrenaline dump right now, so my mind is fried and I'm all over the place, and I might be missing a detail or two, so I'm terribly sorry, but I'm really shaken and desperate for help. Any that I can get. I think I'm being haunted and I need opinions. So, I've always liked taking walks outside late at night, especially in my yard because I have a pretty big one. About a month back, about 3 or 4 a.m, I was walking back up to my house because I lived on a hill, and I noticed this dark shadow behind a truck about 6 feet away from me. I stared at it for maybe 1 to 2 seconds trying to figure out what it was, when the thing crouched down behind the truck like it was hiding. In that moment I froze and then started to back away until I was close enough to my house to run to the door. At night wasn't a person because although it was dark, it definitely wasn't dark enough to make someone appear pitch black, unless they were wearing something like a black skin suit or something. Anyway, the other day, about a month later, I was taking my usual walk outside, obviously more cautious because I'd been experiencing a bit of paranoia since the last time, and every time I stepped out, I could feel it. Anyway, so I'm looking around the area where I first spotted the thing, and then I see another shadow. And it wasn't my shadow because I could see it elsewhere on the ground. I started to run down the hill, straight to my neighbour's porch because he had a guard dog outside and I knew it would protect me. After about 3 minutes of me being down there, safe, I heard this loud, incoherent whispering coming from a dark area, and it went on for about 5 seconds. I know I wasn't hallucinating because the cat that was also on the porch and the dog immediately shot their heads in the direction of the whispering and just stared. I eventually woke my neighbour up because I felt unsafe going back up to my house alone. After this experience, I just stopped going out at night. Yesterday though, about 3 days after the second event, I was laying in bed, and from my window, I could hear that loud whispering again. I've tried asking this spirit to leave, burning sage and placing blessed salt around my windows and doors, but so far, nothing seems to be working. Anyone got any advice? I've never liked Disneyland. And I know what you're thinking. No, it's not the rides, it's not the shows, and it's not the food. It's the mascots. Something about a silent somebody in a creepy, essentially expressionless costume just staring at you. It creeps me out beyond reason. And it isn't funny how my family is a big Disney family. We go there at least every month, and you better believe every birthday theme was Disney. When I was younger, I'd even cry every time we'd go to the happiest place in the world. At least now as an adult, I don't have to go as much. But what do you know? It's my sister's birthday, and here we are, at Disneyland. I got through most of the day just fine, but at one point, something on the loudspeakers triggered a large crowd, and I got separated from my family. I walk in the direction I saw them last, and eventually I end up at a closed section of the park. I turn around, and there he is. Someone in a goofy costume just standing there. Can I help you? No response. Are you on a break, or am I not where I'm supposed to be, or... He takes a step towards me. Hey, step back. Don't come any closer. The nervousness in my voice was clear as day. For a while, no one says anything. He just stands there. Well, I'm gonna go now, so... And then he immediately starts sprinting towards me, and in one of his hands, I see a knife. I immediately scream and duck under the stay out tape and just run. I don't know where I'm going, but I book it as fast as I can. As I run further into the park, I begin to see splatters of blood everywhere. At this point, the adrenaline has worn off, and I'm getting really tired. My legs are on fire, my lungs are burning too. I look behind, and I see him there, still as fast as ever. I slowly start giving up and just hope he kills me quick, when I hear a thud. I turn, and I see him face first on the ground. I get a burst of energy and sprint away, and I run for like 20 seconds before I nearly collapse. I scurry inside an abandoned shop and hide underneath the counter. I hear the sound of padded feet run by me. Then I hear footsteps in the stool next to me. Then those padded feet come up to my stool. I see his shadow appear and look over. I hear his heavy breathing as he looks in my stool for a while. Eventually though, he walks away. I look over the counter and I see his back coated with blood. After what felt like an eternity, I ran out of the abandoned park, past all the rides, straight to the exit and drive home. Safe to say, I don't like Disneyland. I don't like mascots. Is my house haunted? So, a bit of a long one. This is my first post, and I'd like to talk about a couple of incidents in my family home and see if anyone has an explanation. My house is made out of 2 old mining cottages in northern England. They were built at some point in the 19th century. I've lived there for 25 years, and while I'm not exactly a believer in the paranormal, I cannot fully explain some of the things that have gone on inside my house. Some things are the kind of cliche haunted house occurrences that go kind of unnoticed and just become normal. No one has really felt threatened in any way, but household items regularly go missing, curtains close by themselves, doors slamming or opening by themselves, and the odd bump in the night. Nothing really unexplainable or out of place in the first half of a cheesy haunted house movie. Occasionally a family friend or my high school girlfriend has felt uncomfortable in the house alone and couldn't really explain why, but for my family it was just our home. However, there have been some more unusual incidents that have, again, kind of just been accepted by my family. Like one evening when I was about 23, my father went out to pick up my mother from Newcastle just as I was about to have a shower. I heard him leave, but about 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs that I didn't recognise. They had a pace and weight to them that didn't match any of my family members. At first I wasn't alarmed, as I just assumed my father had forgotten something. I saw the shadow cross the hallway and enter my parents' room, so I called out to my father but got no answer. At this point, I assumed my dad had left the door open and someone had broken in. I had been training in martial arts since the age of 4, and maybe I was a little overconfident. I also knew my dad kept a bat by his bed, so I ran into my parents' room, completely naked, towel fell off, ready for a fight. Again, as if it was a cheesy movie, there was no one there. I was certain there was someone there though. More recently, my entire family awoke to a massive crash in the middle of the night that shook the whole house awake, dogs barking and everyone panicking. I thought a car had crashed into the house. However, there was no sign of anything that would make a crash that loud. Nothing had fallen over, none of our neighbours had woken up. I even checked to see if there'd been an earthquake or some kind of explosion nearby, but there'd been nothing. There have been other things, but I just thought I'd share these few to start with. Anyone got any thoughts? My friend, who works for the city's CCTV archives, has seen something disturbing. I hadn't seen Mike in a few months. He'd been buried in work and our usual weekend nights out had about disappeared. Then he called me on a Thursday and invited me over for drinks. Obviously I jumped at the invite, but took note of how depressed he seemed to sound over the phone. By the time I got there, Mike had already started drinking and was slurring his words. A dark cloud seemed to be hovering over him, which got worse as we drank. I finally asked what had been going on with him, and Mike turned darker, afraid. He said it had to do with work. I never really knew what Mike did for a living. I did know he worked for the city in the tech department and that he was involved with the CCTV surveillance network, but I never knew what his day-to-day operations were, which is what he began to describe in detail. Mike explained that there were thousands of cameras scattered throughout the downtown core, outlying neighbourhoods and well into the suburbs of our 1 million plus city. His responsibility was to categorise and archive all the incoming footage. Most of the footage went into very general classifications and were saved in hard drive farms and identified with a lengthy combination of numbers and letters for categorical archiving. They were truly meant to be forgotten about. It was an expensive task, but Mike designed and built an AI screening program that detected common patterns in footage, then sectioned out anomalous behaviour for review. The vast majority wasn't noteworthy, something like 99.99%. Then there was the 0.1%, the car accidents, assaults, swarmings, abductions, murders. Those went into a special archive for use in the criminal investigations. And then there was the 0.0001%. They were held in a classified archive and contained footage capturing events that, for all accounts, were unexplainable. This was called the Tartarus archive. I looked up the word Tartarus after and discovered it was one of the darkest, deepest prisons from Greek mythology. It was said that if you dropped an anvil from heaven, it would take 7 days for it to reach the earth. It would take another 7 days for the anvil to reach Tartarus. It was the place you sent titans when there was nowhere else that you could contain them. When Sisyphus was condemned to an eternity of futility and frustration with a large boulder and a mountain slope, that punishment was carried out in Tartarus. As it turned out, The name was quite fitting to the archive's growing contents. Some footage could be simplified to some strange optical anomalies in the camera and coincidences of light or crackheads on a bender through the subway systems. Other footage, though, defied logic. The others are what had captured Mike's mind that evening. He'd been breaking protocol and bringing hard drives home at night. In fact, he'd been splicing the footage together, capturing and compiling repeat aberrations and editing them into linear sequences. Mike wanted to show me some. It wasn't a bragging or showing off kind of way. It felt more like the sharing of a heavy burden kind of way. I asked if showing me would get me in trouble, but he waved the idea away. I said, yeah, obviously I want to see what's going on in the city. Mike led me down to his workroom where he had monitors and towers and piles of external hard drives set up. We sat down and he skimmed through some drives nervously. Then he landed on one. Mike told me this anomaly was codenamed Lincoln Spectre. He pressed play. On the larger screen, black and white footage started up showing Lincoln Avenue, one of our less attractive downtown streets, at about 3 a.m. The camera angle showed the length of Lincoln Avenue as it led into the downtown core. The street appeared empty and quiet. From a side road, a woman emerged, walking towards the camera. As she approached the intersection, she turned over her shoulder and appeared to scream. Then the woman took off, sprinting past the camera, which cut to a new, wider angle from another camera across the street. We watched the woman running frantically, seemingly being chased. But she was the only one on the street. There was no one anywhere else around her. The woman kept screaming as she ran, and the cameras kept following, cutting between different CCTV angles. We watched as the woman was chased into the middle of an empty intersection. She fell, then cowered, as if something massive was standing over her. The woman's neck stiffened and she began to levitate off the ground. Her body looked like a rag doll as something lifted her by the throat until she was floating a dozen feet above the road in the middle of the intersection. Then, the woman's head snapped to the left and her body fell to the ground. The video ended and went black. I sat shocked. Mike saw my expression and said, "You ain't seen nothing yet." I asked if it was real, if what I saw was unaltered, raw footage. Mike said all he'd done was put the clips together. None of the content had been touched. He told me he found out the incident ended up being described as a hit and run, and the case was left figuratively open for more evidence to amass, which it never would. The department kept the footage hidden, claiming it was a camera malfunction. No one outside of Mike and his boss had seen the video of how the poor woman actually died. I started to understand the air of somberness Mike was carrying around. Mike started the next video. This one was codenamed Black Crab and was much longer than the previous one. It started in the subway systems at the underground Walkley station shortly after closing up for the night. Walkley was the last stop on the route, and the exterior was shouldered by new housing developments on one side and untouched forest and swampland on the other. The camera was pointed down along the subway platform on the east side and showed its entire length, with benches and garbage cans populating it. At the far end, the tunnel was filled with darkness. The lights on the platform shot off and the station went dark. The camera switched to night vision and everything became visible again. My eyes were trained on the platform, waiting for something to happen. Finally, there was movement. It was coming from the tunnel. It was difficult to identify what exactly it was at first, as its movements were strange and the footage was grainy. But it got closer to the camera and I got a better look. It resembled a human, a man, but he was walking on his hands and feet, upside down with his back arched and his stomach pointed at the ceiling. He had long, dark hair and it dragged along the ground, and he wore tattered layers of old jackets and torn pants. He moved like a crab, jerkily yet quickly and easily as he made his way to the staircase. The footage cut to a new camera in the dark hallway leading to the stairs out of the station. We watched the crab-like walker claw up 2 steps at a time and then crawl over the turnstiles and towards the exit. The footage cut again, now showing the exterior of the station entrance. The crab walker squeezed and twisted and manoeuvred his body through the locked and closed entrance gate. It looked impossible to accomplish, but he did it. Once outside, the crab walker eyed his surroundings before skittering off towards the woods and disappearing. The footage cut to an hour later and revealed the crab walker reappearing from the woods. He was dragging a small animal by the tail in his teeth. The animal looked like a cat. The crab walker squeezed back through the gate, crawled through the station and disappeared into the subway tunnel. Again, Mike saw my expression and told me there was more. He showed me the length of the video, which was over an hour long. Mike had compiled over 20 sequences of the crab walker creeping out of the subway station and into the woods. Mike skimmed through the video towards the end and we watched the crab walker come out of a sewer in the downtown alley. It crawled over to a pile of garbage bags and cardboard boxes, then it jumped into them and some kind of vicious frenzy ensued. There was someone else in the pile of garbage. Hands and feet thrashed about as they were struggling for their life. Then the movement stopped and the hands and feet were still. The crab walker's body moved jerkily about, but I couldn't see what was happening because of the darkness and all the garbage bags and boxes obscuring the camera's view. Mike leaned over to me and whispered that the crab walker was eating a homeless man. This caused a criminal investigation as the dead body was found mutilated and festering in the open alleyway. Mike followed up on the inquiry. What he discovered was the crab walker was who the authorities believed to be a man named David Fletcher. Decades ago, David had been a prominent lawyer with a family. But one Christmas there was a house fire and his wife and kids were killed in the blaze. It was David's fault. He lost everything, including his mind. Everyone has a breaking point, whether they know it or not. A place where they bend too far and then snap. David found his. Family and friends described his descent as nightmarish. David lived on the streets, became addicted to drugs and tumbled into mental illness. The last anyone knew of him was from 10 years prior. He'd thrown himself in front of a subway train at the Walkley station and no one heard from or saw him again. It appeared that somehow David had survived the subway hit. His back had broken and healed strangely, causing him to move the way he did. He'd adapted to the new posture and lived in the darkness of the subway tunnels, finding sustenance from drain water and the wild animals he caught. That was what Mike found out, at least, but then he said that was just the answer the investigators gave in discovery. Who knows where the truth lay? Mike said there was always an answer for the videos he saw. Whether the answers were true or not, no one knew, but the ones that had to become public all needed explanations, however absurd. Either way, David was never found and didn't reappear on the subway footage. Mike plugged a new hard drive in. He poured a fresh drink and told me this was the one that was troubling him. The file was codenamed Cloud Mirror. I wasn't sure I wanted to see it, but before I could object, Mike pressed play. All the monitors lit up with footage from different intersections downtown on the exact date and time as each other, 5 in total. The streets on each screen were empty and quiet, no cars or people. Suddenly, at the exact same time, in the center of the intersections, a small glow pulsed into existence. Some kind of orb, roughly the size of a bowling ball. The streetlights around it pulsed with energy waves as the orb grew larger. It grew to the size of a beach ball. Then it flashed out. The streetlights went back to normal, and the intersection was as lifeless as it was before. I asked Mike what they were. He told me he had gigs of footage of the orbs and had watched them repeatedly. He didn't know what they were at first. Then they started to change. Mike clicked onto the next video. Again, The 5 monitors lit up with the same intersections and time of night, but several weeks later. The street lights glowed and pulsed, and an orb manifested into existence again. It grew to its beach ball size, but then altered its surface and glow. Something gas-like replaced it, growing outward into a couch-sized cloud of dark grey. One of the cameras was closer, so I got to see the small clouds in detail. It looked like a volcanic eruption wrapping around itself. They were large, constantly morphing blobs that curled outward from a glowing centre, resembling a Mandelbrot fractal as a gaseous-based organism. It was fascinating to see them floating in the middle of the street, so alien to our roads and stoplights and street lamps. Then they began to move, gliding down empty roads. The cameras cut to different angles, following the clouds on some unknown path, zigging and zagging onto new streets and through alleyways. Then they'd stop. The clouds hovered in the centre of their intersection. They'd lower to ground level, standing straight up like a large coffin. Holding rigid to their shape, their exteriors continued to shift and mould together like magnets made of smoke. Something on one of the monitors caught my eye. Down the street, people appeared. They'd seen the cloud and were walking towards it. The group looked drunk and fascinated by the floating entity, so much so they were approaching it. As they did, the cloud became brighter. The street lamps around it pulsed. The group were in some kind of trance, staring into the morphing blob. One of the group, a guy, stared into it like a zombie, then walked right into the cloud and disappeared. None of the group tried to stop him. Instead, another one followed him in, and another, and another. All 5 members of the group disappeared into the cloud. Then they reappeared one at a time. The guy first, then in the order they went in. Only they weren't stumbling and boisterous and drunk now. They were walking upright, using minimal movements. They formed in a perfect 5-person circle for several seconds over quick words, then turned and all went in separate directions. Their strides, arm swings and speed all matched. Another monitor showed a similar situation with a larger group of people, lost in reverie as they marched one after another into the cloud. Each monitor showed the same thing now, people entering the clouds and coming back out. Different. Mike stopped the video. I asked him if he'd shown this to anyone else and he said he hadn't, not even to his one boss, which was a problem because he had a meeting with his boss in the morning to discuss the missing footage. I asked why he didn't show the footage to his boss. The footage seemed more than serious. People were being replaced by something. Mike sighed and put a new video on. The main monitor lit up and showed a new downtown street. The date was from earlier this week. One of the clouds was floating in the intersection, and a middle-aged couple were walking nearby, the husband with a slight limp in his right leg. The couple saw the cloud and was sucked in by its aura. They approached it, eyes wide and mouths open. Both the husband and the wife entered the cloud and disappeared. After a moment, they reappeared. The husband's limp was gone. Mike turned to me and said, "That was my boss and his wife." Six stupendously shocking, scary stories. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified.